Go, Cian Corley. Taoiseach, as we are tasked here today, we're coming in talking about the review of the Inner City Initiative. I think it would be remiss of me not to mention that tomorrow, once again, several hundred people from the North Inner City will descend on the Dáil in protest, and that protest will be in recognition of the 16-year anniversary of the death of Terence Wheelock. Taoiseach, I cannot separate the Inner City Initiative from the legacy of poor relationships between the community of the North Inner City, which has for decades been disadvantaged by structural inequality and structural violence, from an initiative that had absolutely no targets, no benchmarks, lots of good work because of the nature of the good people involved. But it will not address the legacy of a community which has a mistrustful relationship with the state and the infrastructures of the state because of deeds they believe were inflicted upon them. And to my mind, there is no greater example of that than the North Inner City's communities' continued 16-year quest for what they believe to be the outstanding questions that remain to the death of Terence Wheelock. Until this is addressed every year, like tomorrow, they will continue to march on the Dáil, march on Star Street Garda Station. They will continue to have a mistrustful relationship with the state, and all of these nice initiatives will fall on deaf ears. So, Taoiseach, once again, in advance of Terence's anniversary tomorrow, I'm asking for an independent review into the circumstances that led to his death, so that his family can stop having to show up at Star Street Garda Station and at the Dáil demanding what they believe is justice for their son and their brother. So please, Taoiseach, I know there was a GSOC review. That was 10 years ago, and questions are still remaining. Maybe we can simply say, let's address this issue now and bring some finality to it.
First, I want to thank the deputies for raising these issues. And in respect of Deputy MacDonald's basic point about a review of progress, yes, I think we should do that. And I'll talk to my Secretary General in relation to that, and in terms of the broader interest in terms of just reviewing the progress that has been made and the remaining issues, and perhaps lessons learned from the model. Because, as I said earlier, maybe in the previous leaders' questions, I'm anxious that we would broaden out and learn from previous experience in terms of models that we developed before in certain communities in terms of multidisciplinary, multi-agency-based responses to disadvantage. And I think we can learn lessons from this initiative now, which has been up and running since 2017. I would be anxious to do that, and I don't doubt what you're saying in terms of the social and economic problems remaining. And Deputy Gannon has referred to those also. So that's something we can do. In respect of the issue that you raised in terms of the childcare issue, now I did write to you in respect of that. And again, I'm anxious to resolve this. No provider should be losing 70% in any new scheme. I don't think anyone intends that to happen, nor should it happen. The Department of Children, Equality and Disability have aimed to ensure alignment of existing initiatives as well as the development of other responses which add value to the actions to achieve maximum impact in terms of integrated service delivery relating to children, young people and their families. In respect of the issues that you've raised, my understanding is officials from that department have met with a small number of providers operating in the North East Inner City several times in relation to the National Childcare Scheme. Now, I'm just saying this is what I've been informed, so you may take it as you wish, but if we could follow up on it. It became apparently through this engagement that some issues arising are due to a lack of familiarity with the scheme. So, for example, parents registering for the wrong subsidy. On this basis, the Department of Children have provided and are going to provide additional training and support to providers through the Dublin City Childcare Committee so that they can in turn advise and direct parents and better understand the operations of the scheme and subsidies available through the scheme. A letter issued to community providers on the 23rd of July restating the Department of Children's offer of case management support and the potential for financial support where assessment criteria are met. A highly skilled and experienced early years specialist team from the Better Start Quality Development Services is to work directly in a mentoring capacity with services in the North East Inner City to support quality improvement. Dublin City Childcare Committee is a key resource that is supporting services in the area on matters relating to the structure of their service delivery, governance and management, and optimal use of the current subsidy schemes. Minister O'Gorman and the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth are actively monitoring this issue, committed to ensuring the scheme functions in the best interest of families and children, and that the department supports services in adjusting to this newer, more progressive approach to early learning and childcare, and that state investment in the sector delivers affordable, accessible, sustainable and high-quality service provision. The department has engaged an external consultant to review the first year of the scheme, including looking at usage by socioeconomically disadvantaged families and providers serving socioeconomically disadvantaged communities. Work is also, in addition, progressing on a new funding model for the Early Learning and Childcare Centre, which has been led by an expert group. To cut to the chase, look, I think we need to engage with the providers that you have identified, see how this scheme is meeting their requirements, and see what we can do to make up the balance. It's not our objective that any child from a disadvantaged situation should lose out on childcare. So I know you've raised this a good few times. So I think we need to sort of get people around the table and just say, look, what are the issues here and can we get it sorted? Deputy Gannon, you have been consistent in raising the issue of the very sad death of Terence Wheelock, and again I extend my deepest sympathies to the Wheelock family for their terrible loss and the pain that his tragic death still causes them. The challenges are, as you know, it was subject to the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission, and that the report of this inquiry was published by GSOC in March 2010. I would also note that legal proceedings arising from these matters were settled in 2014. Both GSOC and the courts are fully independent in the exercise of their functions. It's not open to the Minister for Justice or indeed to me to intervene or comment on an inquiry that has been carried out by GSOC, or indeed the outcomes of any court proceedings. It was fully considered by GSOC. The death has been the subject of legal proceedings. I have to say that I have a general view, and I think we have to, more generally across our system, see how do our independent agencies, they really should be the mechanisms by which these issues are resolved. And there are no easy answers, but I'm not clear as to what new mechanisms can be devised that supersede ones that we've put a lot of investment and resources in to do just that, to carry out independent investigations into the actions of, say, on Garda Síochána, for example, in given situations. I empathise with what you're saying, but I'm not clear that I think we need as a political system as well to have greater faith too in the organisations that we set up. Otherwise, we'll be, we'll be having different types of inquiries on the different acts on an ongoing basis, and that's not.
This issue is, and I don't want to put undue pressure on you when I'm asking a question that I haven't given you pre-advance notice of. But GSOC was in its infancy when this particular case emerged, and maybe it requires a new look with fresh eyes. And if that's some GSOC, so be it.
So, Taoiseach, firstly on the early education and childcare situation, because we've corresponded at this stage extensively, and I accept your bona fides that nobody wants to see any child, any disadvantaged child, put in this position. So I will take you up on the offer, if that's okay, in terms of engagement in your office, but also through the Minister. Yeah. So thank you for that. Secondly, just to reiterate Deputy Gannon's call for a fresh investigation in respect of the Terence Wheelock case. And it is true to say that there were previous processes and procedures, but it's also true to say that big questions remain, and not just for the family, but for the wider community. So I think it would be helpful if we could have political agreement that whatever the specific mechanism, that at a minimum, that there would be some form of review of this particular case. Any death in custody is extremely serious. As you know, in the early noughties, there were concerns, very profound concerns about places of detention, including Garda stations, and previous governments had to deal with that reality. So I believe that we need to progress this issue. There will be the gathering for Terence's anniversary, and this issue doesn't go away, and it festers in the soul of a community, as we have seen in other parts of Ireland. So I think general political agreement today that there are issues here and that they need to be reviewed in and of itself as a first step would be good progress, Taoiseach.
Well, two items there. I will take up the issue on the childcare question, and I'll ask Minister Roderick Gorman to engage with you in relation to that, and I'll follow up with him. I can't agree to any form of new inquiry today, and I've just been making the general point that ultimately we've got to get to a position where our existing mechanisms are ones that we trust in, and that we say, something it's their duty to investigate, because we can see even with commissions of investigation how even after 3 years and 4 years of investigations that people are not necessarily satisfied with the outcomes of them. And it creates all sorts of challenges then for our entire system of inquiry and investigation in terms of GSOC, commissions of investigation, tribunals of inquiry, Gardaí, OECD, or OAS, the Office of Corporate Enforcement, and we're now setting up a new mechanism for financial impropriety of finance officials. So when we create these institutions that are arm's length and independent, we've got to allow them to do their work. That's the point I'm making here. I think that's something we're going to have to develop, but I'll engage with the deputies afterwards.
Question 3 from Deputy Paddock.
Question 2, is it? Or,
sorry. 3.
What's my 2? Sorry. Yeah. Following the disclosure in a newspaper report earlier this year of certain information relating to the final report of the Commission of Investigation on Mother and Baby Homes in advance of consideration of the report by the Government, I requested that an investigation be carried out. A senior official in my department is carrying out the investigation in the context of a broader examination of the overall arrangements for the management of documents for government meetings and their confidentiality. That process is ongoing.
Margaret, I can't call you, and this reflects the content of the last question to a certain extent. Taoiseach, I know from first-hand speaking to many of the survivors of the mother and baby homes that the actions of yourself and Minister O'Gorman around the time of the report's publication were deeply hurtful. Many of those people are elderly, and some of those people are obviously very vulnerable at the moment. I spoke to people who attended the Zoom meeting, for example, with yourself, and it sounded extremely inappropriate too. Their microphones were switched off, they didn't have an opportunity to ask questions. Questions were submitted to yourself in advance and presumably vetted by the department as well. At the time, you gave credibility to the details that were leaked by giving comments to them to a journalist who wrote the story, and that caused great hurt as well. I would ask you, will you apologise for doing that? And also, when will you publish the findings of the government's investigation into that leak? It's been 9 months, Taoiseach, since that investigation was first heralded. And if we're pointing the fingers at all these other investigative vehicles in this country, and yet our own departments are taking 9 months to carry out an investigation as simple as this, that leaves serious questions. And the issue of leaks is also a really important issue. The idea that, for example, the Sapone affair was predicated on a leak from your cabinet, that we are told. A leak which, by law, is a criminal offence to undertake. We have these reports in the newspapers that a junior minister set a trap for a senior minister, and then that information the senior minister was given to the Taoiseach, and that the Taoiseach was carrying out an investigation into this. Where lies that investigation? Are they evaporated too, like the rain of the summer? Are we ever going to find out, is this the case, that these people will be held to account? Because if there's no consequences for any of these leaks, there will never be any change. There will never be any accountability if there's no consequences. I'd ask you, Taoiseach, to detail exactly where stands that investigation. When will it be finished? When will the survivors of the mother and baby homes know exactly the truth of that leak? When will the answers be published? And also, if you could shed some light onto the whole idea, the incredible Machiavellian situation where we have seemingly one senior Fine Gael minister leaking on another and a junior minister setting a trap for them as well.
Thank you, Karen Corlin. As you say, Taoiseach, the examination is into this particular leaking of details of the Mother and Baby Home Commission report, but then more generally around what's called unauthorised dissemination of documentation and other information relating to the work of the Cabinet. My God, you have your hands full, because I don't know, has there been an administration previously that has leaked, that has been so leaky? I mean, just formidable in its capacity to leak if nothing else. It's quite astonishing. And it is, as my colleague has said, a very, very serious matter. In this case, the leaking of this report caused incredible heartache and anger amongst a group of people who the state had failed comprehensively, people who had suffered comprehensively. But we know that it's not an isolated incident, and we'll talk about the Zappone debacle later, but all of it stacks up to the most incredibly cavalier attitude in your government, Taoiseach, and particularly amongst your Fine Gael colleagues in respect of cabinet confidentiality, the guarding and storage of government communications and information. And as I'm on my feet, can I mention two issues of concern to survivors and families of the people who are in these institutions. The first, Taoiseach, is the burials legislation. The Joint Committee on Children submitted its pre-legislative scrutiny report on the bill to the Minister before the recess. The legislation had been unduly delayed by the Department in the first instance. Can I ask that you will ensure that the Minister responds swiftly to the committee's report and that the government bill is introduced as soon as possible? And can I also raise a concern that there seems to be no urgency from government in progressing the survivors' redress scheme? The consultative strand of the process was completed months ago, and yet we still have no indication from the Minister as to when the interdepartmental group will conclude its work and report to him. And have you sought, Taoiseach, an update from the Minister as to when the Minister will bring his recommendations for the redress scheme to government for a decision? And could I ask you, and I appeal to you to follow up on these issues in respect of the survivors, those issues, but alongside it is this, the grievance, and it's still a deep grievance in respect of the leaking of this report. It's utterly outrageous, as is the other associated behaviour. And Taoiseach, it's happening on your watch. It is happening on your watch, and you need to take a hold of this. It needs to be knocked on the head. We need answers, and there have to be sanctions. Whoever leaked from Cabinet should be named and shamed and should be sanctioned for it. If your government, if any administration is going to have any credibility at all. Thank you, Ceann Comhairle.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that the issue, look, the general point that deputies have made is valid, and in terms of the protection of documentation and any information, and the storage of such information, dissemination of such information has to be protected. And I've asked for new mechanisms to be brought into play to ensure the protection of material that goes before government and that comes before government. And the entire response of government to the Commission of Investigation on Mother and Babies' Homes is to once and for all comprehensively deal with the issues that have been raised. That, in terms of the ongoing investigation, I'm not preempting the outcome of it, but simply to say that it will be dealing with the overall arrangements for the management of documents for government meetings and their confidentiality. What we are determined to do, there will be an action plan in terms of all of the recommendations that were contained in the Mother and Baby Homes report, and I think that will be published shortly in terms of the survivor-centred approach, the access to, some of it has happened, access to personal information, the education research, the archiving and databases, the memorialisation, restorative recognition, and I'll come back to that in a moment, dignified burial. The key issue, I think, for many has been the information and tracing. And we have published that legislation. It's with the pre-legislation committee and has been with them. That is radical. I think it's in line with what most members of the House, and in particular the survivors groups, wanted. The scheme was published on the 11th of May. This is the most effective way, I think, we can meet the needs of all those who were in mother and baby homes. It's been forwarded, as I said, to the Oireachtas pre-legislative scrutiny committee. It gives access to birth and early life information for people who are adopted, or indeed who otherwise have questions in relation to their origins. And I would like to work with members, but I would like to see this progressed prior to the end of the legislative term. If I'm honest, I think there's a danger that it may not make it to the end of term. In other words, we may have to, it could go over, but if it comes out of pre-legislative scrutiny, I know the Minister is working in respect of, he's watching what's happening at pre-legislative committee to try and anticipate some recommendations and changes. And I think it's, it's that legislation covers not just all those who are adopted, but everybody who needs access in relation to their origins, will support access to early life care and medical information and so on. It will also have a comprehensive tracing service for people who want to make contact, share information, request information from a birth relative, establish the contact preference register to allow people to be able to record their preference in relation to having contact with birth relatives as well. And then in terms of the legislation on burials, the Minister has done detailed work in that respect, and he's visited the tomb site recently, met with all of the interested parties there. That legislation is to support the excavation, exhumation, and where possible the identification of remains and their dignified reburial. The legislation will support intervention at the tomb site and any other site where intervention is reasonably required by virtue of the manifestly inappropriate nature of burials that may have taken place. And separately, the Minister and the team will engage with former residents and their advocacy groups on the question of appropriate, dignified local memorialisation of known or agreed burial sites where this is not already the case. Now, that legislation will be brought forward shortly. The Minister updated Cabinet this morning in relation to that. In relation to compensation payments for the victims, that's a very fundamental element of the Government Action Plan, is to establish an ex gratia payment scheme. This scheme will include a financial payment and a form of enhanced medical card as well. And an interdepartmental group was set up to develop detailed proposals for the scheme, taking account of the recommendations of the Commission, but it's not limited to those recommendations. It can go beyond those recommendations. The Minister has been overseeing this. The group's work is guided by human rights focus and informed by consultation with survivors, which took place during March and April. I'm glad to say that consultation received a strong response. The work of the group is being finalised, and Minister Roderick O'Gorman looks forward to getting the group's final report, bringing the proposals to government for approval early in this Dáil term. So I would hope that we'd have that before the Dáil in a short while. Government will then establish the scheme and make it available for application as soon as possible, beginning, I would say, at this stage in early 2022. So that kind of covers the range of issues that deputies have raised.
Thank you. Taoiseach, question 4.
Deputy Dublin, it's your. Do you want to go ahead of me because it's your question?
Yeah, I'd like to, if both of us can ask a supplementary.
I just have a very short question.
Yeah. Taoiseach, you gave no answer there in relation to the update of the investigation into the leaking at all. That's, a deafening silence. You gave no answer even in the updating to where that investigation is or when that investigation will be publicised. No information has been departed to us on the basis of that question. So as of yet, there are no consequences to the individuals who leaked that and to the pain and the suffering that they caused the survivors of the mother and baby homes. And no action is a hallmark of your office of Taoiseach. And even when the Taoiseach was involved in the leaking of a document to a friend, a confidential contract to a friend, there was no consequence. So how can we expect the Minister in the current Cabinet to actually to stop leaking when there's no consequences to people at this level? Will you guarantee us, Taoiseach, that there will be a specific date with regards to publication of the investigation that's happening into the leaking of the report into the mother and baby homes?
I simply want to ask Taoiseach who leaked details of the Mother and Baby Home Commission of Investigation final report. Who did it? Can you name the person? I'm sure it's been established. It's a limited number of you that had access to it. Who did that, please?
First of all, again, I can't give. I haven't interfered with the investigation. Okay, it's been undertaken by an official in my department. I'm not in a position to say who did what or to give you any confirmation of that, nor indeed in terms of the conclusion of it.
Question 4, Taoiseach.
Count Call, I propose to take questions 4 and 5 together. I spoke with Paul Given, First Minister of the British Irish Association conference in Oxford on the 3rd of September. My most recent detailed engagement with him and with the Deputy First Minister was on the 30th of July, when I chaired the latest plenary meeting of the North-South Ministerial Council via video conference. This wide-ranging discussion between our two governments covered the ongoing cooperation between North and South in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, including the rollout of vaccines and the gradual reopening of society, developments in the delivery of the New Decade, New Approach commitments, the development of the Peace Plus programme, corporate governance matters and board appointments. Following the meeting, the Taoiseach and I participated in a joint conference with the First and Deputy First Minister. I hosted a meeting with Sir Geoffrey Donaldson in government buildings on the 27th of August. We had a good discussion on likely developments over the months ahead, and I emphasised to him the importance of the stability and proper functioning of the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement. On the Northern Ireland Protocol, he outlined the serious difficulties and concerns the unionist community have with the protocol. I stressed that this government was focused on supporting practical solutions and reducing friction where possible, and that we've been active in engaging with our European Union partners on issues relating to the protocol. I also outlined our ongoing outreach with stakeholders in Northern Ireland, and that we are listening carefully to the concerns of the unionist community. We also discussed legacy issues, North-South cooperation, COVID-19 and Afghanistan, and agreed to remain in contact on these and any other matters of mutual concern.
Taoiseach, as you know, the new DUP leader has threatened to collapse the Northern Ireland Executive unless the Northern Ireland Protocol is effectively set aside. He has also said that his party will not cooperate with the institutions established under the Good Friday Agreement, in particular the North-South Ministerial Council. This cannot be allowed to happen, and you must do everything possible to persuade him not to do that. We saw what happened when Sinn Féin deliberately collapsed the institutions previously. Government in Northern Ireland effectively ceased, domestic problems piled up, a political vacuum opened up, and opportunities for violence emerged. We know that there's electoral considerations behind the move by the DUP leader, but we must do everything possible to resolve the outstanding issues in respect of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And as regards the Northern Ireland Protocol, as we know, the UK want to renegotiate the withdrawal agreement and the protocol, and that's not going to happen. But the outstanding issues need to be resolved. The EU need to be flexible. I welcome the recent visit by the Vice President Šefčovič to Northern Ireland, where he engaged with all the relevant stakeholders. The issues of medicines and pets, for example, have been sorted out, but further compromises and solutions are now needed. In your discussions with Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, did you see a pathway to sort out these problems? And there's also the matter of legacy, which you mentioned in your contribution there. As we know, the UK government plans to introduce an amnesty for troubled-related killings. It is proposed that legislation will be introduced by the end of the year. And this is contrary to the 2014 Stormont House Agreement. Did you discuss this issue with the DUP leader, and what's his view of it, the whole proposals from the British government in relation to legacy? And I'm not sure that did you mention there the whole Shared Island initiative? Did that come up in your discussions with Sir Geoffrey Donaldson as well? And did you get the impression that he is supportive of it, that he believes it's beneficial to the people of Northern Ireland? So I just welcome your views on that. Is there support from the DUP in relation to the Shared Island Initiative and what it's trying to achieve?
Neil Richard.
I just go by the names here. Agus Untitled Chapter. I speak towards question 5 in my name, and I thank the Taoiseach for his ever fulsome response about his recent meetings with the First Minister and the leader of the DUP in Northern Ireland. But I ask frankly, Taoiseach, when will you meet them next? Will there be a next time before there's an assembly election? And what can you do in the office that you hold to ensure that those meetings take place, not just between yourself, but between the ministers of this government and the ministers in the Northern Irish Executive? Because it is simply unacceptable that once again we see political activities jeopardising the Good Friday Agreement and the very important institutions that ensure North-South cooperation at a time, I would argue, that cooperation between administrations have never been so important. We look worryingly at the situation in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic in Northern Ireland, and we need to see how both administrations can work closely together. Both administrations have very clear opposition to the British government's position on legacy, and as Deputy Haughey has outlined, there is much work still to be done on the protocol. So my question that I submit to you, Taoiseach, is how can you ensure that the political play acting of the DUP does not jeopardise the responsibilities of the Good Friday Agreement in your position as a co-guarantor of that agreement?
Margaret, the last Corlia, and I just want on this point to say that the Good Friday Agreement and how it underpins Stormont has to be reformed. We cannot have an ongoing situation where one party can pull down the administration in the north of Ireland. But I just wanted to focus on another aspect of this. Denise Mullen is an Aontú councillor in Mid-Ulster. 46 years ago, the Glenanne gang murdered her father in her family home. Denise was just 4, and she came on her father's lifeless body in that home, and she had to stay with her father for 2 hours before the medical professionals could get into the house because they were fearful that the house was booby-trapped. The Glenanne gang murdered 120 people in that Tyrone and Armagh area, and they did so in cohort with the RUC and the British Army. And they also planted bombs in Dublin, killing 34 people in the Dublin and Monaghan bombings in 1994. Just last year, Councillor Denise Mullen herself received a death threat from Garfield Beattie, who was the man who murdered her father. So these issues are alive in people's lives right now. And the idea that the British could consider giving an amnesty to people who are involved in these heinous crimes is absolutely wrong. And I've asked 3 Taoiseach, Enda Kenny, Leo Varadkar and yourself to meet with the survivors of the Glenanne gang. Both of the first 2 refused to do so, ignored those requests. In fairness to yourself, you said you would, and I appreciate that, and I know COVID has gotten in the way of that, and I would ask if you can find time in your schedule to finally meet with those people, especially now, especially at this critical time when the British are seeking to do what they want to do. I also attended the Ballymurphy 50th year anniversary just at the start of August in Belfast, and one of the sentences that they used over and over again was the British are trying to get away with murder. And that's exactly what they're trying to do in this situation. And I would ask you, Taoiseach, to say that the Irish government will not accept this, under no circumstances, unilateral move by the British government.
Thank you, Margaret. Last Count Corley. So as has been stated here, but it's worth restating, there is absolute opposition to any proposal from the British government in respect of an amnesty, and I think that is one of the issues on which we have a common position actually right across the island. The question, Taoiseach, is how that is leveraged to influence the behaviour of a British government that quite frankly doesn't give tuppence for the rule of law or compliance with international law and norms and standards. Secondly, Taoiseach, I was at that meeting with Commissioner Šefčovič, and just to say it was very clear, and the Commissioner set out, firstly, the enthusiasm for the EU institutions to be flexible, to be reasonable. I think everybody wants those things. And secondly, that there are solutions. There are solutions in respect of medicines. There are solutions in respect of the checks, which some regard as excessive in these times. What there is no room for is any misunderstanding around the protocol itself, the need for it, and the fact that it will endure. And I very much regret, and I know very many people deeply resent, the kind of sabre rattling that the DUP have engaged with. I think it needs to be made clear to them by everyone concerned, including London, that kind of behaviour will not be rewarded in any fashion. And Commissioner Šefčovič heard at first hand from business, from other interests, community interests, that people recognise that there are difficulties, that there are complications that can be sorted out, but they also heard a huge appetite for progress. The DUP are in a minority, as a matter of fact, in their unilateral action to pull away from the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement. They are on their own. The party leaders will meet again on Friday, and I believe that the isolated position of the DUP will be reflected again. It's important as Taoiseach, and that this House realise that that's the situation.
Well, I'm going to thank the deputies, Deputy Haughey in Richmond, for raising these issues, and the other deputies, Hobeen and MacDonald, for their questions. Deputy Haughey raised the issue of the new DUP leader and my meeting with him, and the whole area of the executive in the north. And could I say at the outset that the leader of the DUP raised with me really and took the opportunity at the meeting to highlight his concern and to put me in no doubt that there's unionist concern around the protocol. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, that was, I think, his main purpose of the meeting. Our sense was, and our point back was, that Europe was in solution mode and that Europe wants to create a flexible response to any issues that might arise around the operation of the protocol in respect of people living in Northern Ireland and in terms of the routine sort of trade that goes on between the UK and Northern Ireland. On the shared island issue, they're not against it, but official unionism has had challenges in sort of openly embracing North-South initiatives of this kind. What is very helpful is that about 1,000 people have now participated in the dialogues around the shared island from all communities in Northern Ireland, all traditions, young people, more women, and 2 new groups have been formed out of the dialogues. An All-Ireland Women's Forum have been established arising out of the dialogues to give a stronger voice to women in relation to the future of the island, and also in terms of human rights and other aspects of it. And that's good. On the amnesty, he's unequivocally against any amnesty. He doesn't want anyone who was guilty of murder or guilty of murdering anybody or killing anybody to be free from justice. And he was very, very clear about that at the meeting also. He wished us well in terms of, he understood, I pointed out, took the opportunity to say about the shared island or bona fides, and how that we felt this was important to not just build bridges physically as a narrow water bridge, but actually to do it also between people and to get practical things sorted on energy and climate change and all of that. The other key point is subsequently then at the British Irish Association, Deputy Richmond's point as well, there is no window of opportunity, I would say, to see can we get this issue resolved between the European Union, the United Kingdom, the parties in Northern Ireland, and the government in the Republic playing a facilitative role. I think we have sensitised the EU system to the issues, and I met with Vice President Šefčovič for dinner, for a long meeting prior to he going to Northern Ireland the day before. It's very clear to me from that meeting, as Deputy McDonald and others have said, that the EU is in solution mode, and I've conveyed that to unionist leaders, I've conveyed that to all parties. It's very clear to us that the EU want to be helpful here. The EU have invested a lot in the peace process in Ireland. They see it as one of the success stories around European conflicts. Most conflicts are frozen, as they would say, and didn't get resolved. This one did, and through the Peace Fund, I mean, the Peace Fund now at the moment will go to about $1 billion. And that was because the European Union put 120 million in initially, which then leverages a British pro rata response, an Irish government pro rata response, an executive pro rata response, and in essence there'll be $1 billion there available over and above the Shared Island Fund for a whole range of cross-border or reconciliation projects and initiatives within the North. So Europe is invested in this. They want to be genuinely engaging and trying to get a resolution to this. And I would agree with what Deputies Haughey and Richmond have said. It's not good enough to say, look, that we're going to end all North-South unless this gets resolved. my main point to anyone I meet is the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement need to be retained, need to be kept operating for the benefits of the people, so that health, housing and all the various issues relating to COVID get dealt with by the Northern Ireland Executive. On the amnesty, and that applies to the Glenanne gang as well, Deputy Tobin, and I will meet with the relatives, and I don't know whether you've been onto my office. There's a lot, look, things have been fairly hectic, and next week we have the UN, so I've met some victims in the past, in a different context, families who were victims of the Glenanne gang. It would be unthinkable that they would be given an amnesty. I think it's unthinkable that the victims of Kingsmills would be given, or Cloudy bombing would be given an amnesty, or indeed Ballymurphy. So, and I took the opportunities at the British Irish Association in my speech to say that unilateralism has no place in terms of the relationships between the British and Irish government and the parties in Northern Ireland. Now, the British Irish Government Conference are looking at the question of how we deal with legacy. We said to the British government there cannot be a unilateral response on this. We've been very clear on it, and I made that in the opening address to the British Irish Conference. I met with government ministers over that weekend, and it's Chatham House rules apply to the British Irish Association meetings, which allows us to speak frankly. And I do think there's a window of opportunity over the next month or so to try and get this resolved. The UK government are saying they do not want to elevate this. They don't want to escalate tensions in the north. I take them at their word, but we need to get the thing, get this onto a solution mode.
Taoiseach.